With TED, I began to revisit my childhood to address my life scripts, the basic messages I've been given by my family while I was growing up that have shaped, or more accurately warped, my self-perception ever since. I was a burden, that my needs and wants were too much and they were inappropriate, and consequently that I was unlovable. That was the message that she was getting from her family. The messages distorted my thinking, causing me to internalize the fiction that I was too hurt and damaged to heal. I wasn't helpless. As an adult, I was responsible for my own life, which included the legacy of my childhood pain. I was finally acquiring the tool that would allow me to decide what to keep in my life and what to discard. Something I'd always wanted, but had eluded me. So, Ashley Judd grew up feeling unlovable. She grew up feeling unloved. Ashley Judd. That's what child abuse does to somebody. It's a Mao Zedong quote: "If the U.S. monopoly capitalist groups persist in pushing their policies of aggression and war, the day is bound to come when they shall be hanged by the people of the whole world. The same fate awaits the accomplices of the United States." Mao Zedong. Page 6. It's from The Slaughter of the Innocents by David Bakken on page 6. Typically, the abused child has no advocate, no one to take his part against his parents. He's handicapped by his physical and mental immaturity and by what has been the classical legal position of a child with respect to his parents. He's too weak to defend himself against assault. He cannot speak on his own behalf because he has not learned how to speak at all. If he were able to speak, hardly anyone would listen. If they listened, they wouldn't believe. And if they believed, they would tend to say that the matter was not their business. And if they decided to make it their business, they would find the legal support for their position questionable. So it's an uphill battle. It's an uphill battle for children in abusive homes. What are you supposed to do if you're in an abusive home? William Graham Sumner, one of the pioneers of modern sociology, William Graham Sumner, one of the pioneers of modern sociology, was one of the very few modern social scientists to recognize the killing of children as a significant feature of human social history. He wrote, "Child sacrifice expresses the deepest horror and sufferings produced by the experience of the human lot. Men must do it, their interests demand it, however much it might pain them. Human sacrifice may be said to have been universal. It's lasted down to the half-civilized state of all nations. It has barely ceased among the present half-civilized peoples today." That's Sumner, page 553. William Graham Sumner. Page 35 of The Slaughter of the Innocents by David Bakken, B-A-K-A-N. So that's men must engage in infanticide. The old Vikings would extend a spear to a newborn boy, and if the child seized it, then it was allowed to live. It was alert, and it was a warrior, and it wanted the spear to throw at enemies. The Dickens, the terms, the Dickens, I'm going to beat the Dickens out of you, I explained earlier. But it came from this one passage, Charles Dickens and David Copperfield, that I put in here. "He beat me then as if he would have beat me to death. Above all the noise we made, I heard them running up the stairs and crying out. I heard my mother crying out and Piggotti. Then he was gone, and the door was locked outside, and I was lying, fevered and hot and torn and sore and raging in my puny way upon the floor." One time, a large number of children were murdered in England for the mere purpose of obtaining the burial money from a benefit club. A benefit club was giving burial money out. Lots of people in England were killing their kids just so they can obtain that money. Children from 5 years of age upward were worked 16 hours at a time, sometimes with irons riveted around their ankles to keep them from running away. They were starved, beaten, and in many other ways maltreated. Many succumbed to occupational diseases. Some committed suicide. Few survived for any length of time. So that's, you know, that's some bullshit. The story of Oedipus, there's an Oedipus complex about where a person wants to kill their father and have sex with their mother. Unfortunately, that's the end result, and that's how the Oedipus complex is used. But the beginning of the Oedipus story, the story which Freud took as a paradigm, the story of Oedipus, begins with the father, Laius. So Laius is Oedipus' father's name. So Laius puts the infant Oedipus out to die. The first aggressive impulse is the father against Oedipus. So Oedipus didn't just want to kill his father just because. Oedipus' father, Laius, put Oedipus out there to die. Just like Lois put Hitler out there for him to die. So even further, the very innocence of the child is respect is one of the greatest defenses. Though he slay me, yet I will trust him. Job 13:15. It is virtually a perfect description of the state of mind of the child, at least a child who stands a chance of survival against a strong infanticidal impulse in the adult. Though he slay me, yet I trust him. Kind of like a dog. That's why people who like dogs get them. They make me nervous. You like the dog because you like to tell them shut up and do as I say. People like cats like an individual personality. They like it for it. Whereas a person likes a dog because the dog worships you like you're the master of the world. So the simple consequence is that the victimized child has been made unattractive in a way which works against his receiving the kind of love and attention which will make him thrive in the future. So the victimized child has been made unattractive in a way which works against his receiving the kind of love and attention which will make him thrive in the future. The abuse of a child creates a child who invites abuse. The abused child is truly the spoiled child more than any overly indulged child could be. The spoiled child, in the latter sense, may tend to make excessive demands upon life, but the former has been made unfit for receiving love. That's what you do. That's what you do to, when you abuse children, that's what you do. You're not just making, both of you guys are, you're an asshole for hitting a kid, but you're making that kid unlovable. You're making them wild and aggressive and being mean and, doing as you had done to them because that's all they know about the world. But when they go out to do, interact that way with the rest of the children at school, they find out that you can't go around just hitting anybody like daddy does to you. So if you try that, eventually you'll get hit back. It makes you an unlovable person if you're going around just hitting everybody. Kinsey's observation may also bespeak equally widespread child abuse practices which created such large relative frequencies of sexual deviation that the aim of child abuse in a biological sense is to reduce the likelihood that the child will procreate when he becomes an adult is also suggested by the observation that children have always been the victims of mutilization practices, the most common site for mutilization being the sex organs. The aim of child abuse: make the person unlovable. Make sure you realize that you're king. The abuser has broken issues inside of them. That's why they feel the need to hit someone that's younger than them. Since they got something broken inside of them, they have to break that child. And they want to break the child in many ways. Break them of self-esteem, of life, of being lovable, and also so they cannot reproduce. If they're unlovable, you won't find a mate, they won't be able to reproduce. That's a better infanticide. Instead of, you can't just outright kill your kids, you have to slowly, mentally, emotionally, psychologically destroy them. Infanticide. It's embedded in the culture, infanticide. So, sex organs, there's mutilization of sex organs. There's not just circumcision, but there's also the parent feels engaging in legitimate punishment for sexual manifestations in the child. It's okay to mutilate them for anything that they might do in that regard. Something also interesting, a lot of people say just spanking, oh, that's okay, it's okay if you spank. Freud actually said from the time 1.5 to 3 years old, that's the anal period. That's when you interpret the entire world through your anus. And if that's true, then that's really sick. It's really sick that a parent would be inflicting pain on the most sensitive spot of the baby. The buttocks are the locus for the induction of pain in a child. We are familiar with the argument that it is a safe locus for spanking. However, the anal region is also the major erotic zone at precisely the time at which the child is likely to be beaten there. That also comes out of Freud too. Thus, it is aptly chosen to achieve the result of deranged sexuality in adulthood, especially if there's any validity in the psychoanalytic observation that the child, albeit unconsciously, interprets punishment generally as punishment for sexual impulse and expression. So I'm expressing myself, I have some sort of sexual inclination, bam, I just got hit. So don't express myself, and if I do feel anything sexually, push it down, submerge it, make sure it doesn't breathe, and get out into the world, make sure nobody knows what's going on. So the energy of libido may serve the whole continuum from aggression, sadism, child abuse, and infanticide to loving, nurturing, and caring for children. Even the physiology of anger and the physiology of sexual arousal are virtually the same. Alfred Kinsey, Sexual Behavior in the Human Female, 1953, page 705. Marvin Gaye. We'll end it off with Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye, I talked a little bit about him from before, but he wrote Sexual Healing, Let's Get It On. Let's get it on. So it's romantic, but he was also one of the experimental folks in the 60s, 70s, made some soul music. But the day I defend myself, I'm nearly murdered, sent to jail, I'm forced into a public trial for more humiliation, more character assassination. There's a restraining order filed on top of me. I was facing maximum penalty of 5 years in prison for 4th-degree assault charge, which was eventually dropped. My sister is going, yelling at the judge, make sure that, she's going to defend her daddy even though he's not being charged with anything, make sure that the judge is yelled at, so I go sent to prison for 5 more years. That's what was happening with me. So, page 96, Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye says, did you love him? Well, let's just say I didn't like him. Let's just say I didn't dislike him. That's what Marvin Gaye, his daddy, says. If I could bring him back, I would. I was afraid of him. This is what Marvin, the nobody son murderer, was saying. I thought I was going to get hurt. I needed self-defense. So that's his perspective there. Marvin Gaye. So he's this big superstar. He's making all this money. He bought the parents a house, but that didn't make Daddy Marvin Gaye happy. So nothing ever made him happy. Michael Jackson used to vomit whenever he'd see his dad. He would puke. He would literally puke whenever he would see him. So Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye's father drank heavily. He was physically abusive. He was also enforced strict religious discipline. Marvin Jr., even though he was carrying his dad's namesake, bore the brunt of the abuse even for petty offenses, such as using Marvin Sr.'s hairbrush or coming home 15 minutes late from school. From the time he was 7 years old to the time he was a teenager, Marvin Gaye, the superstar, had a life at home that consisted of a series of brutal beatings. Living with father is something like living with the king. He was a very peculiar, changeable, cruel, and all-powerful king, said Marvin Gaye. And we were all frightened of him. Whether you're 5 or 6 years old, you don't know what to do when your mother's being beaten and there's hollering and crying going on, said Howard Gaye. like you were supposed to tiptoe around his moods. You were supposed to do anything to win his favor. And I never did. Even though winning his love was the ultimate goal of my childhood, I defied him. I hated his attitude. If it wasn't for Mother, who always was there to console me and praise my singing, I think I would have been one of those child suicides that you read about in the paper. My husband never wanted Marvin, and he never liked him. This is Alberta Gay, Marvin Gaye's mother. He said he used to say that he didn't think that he was really his child, and I told him it was nonsense. He knew Marvin was his, but for some reason he just didn't love Marvin. And what's worse, he didn't want me to love Marvin either.